Who can tell me character traits of an oppressor?
They're sick.
Who said that? Elaborate.
My phone has not stopped ringing from donors and alumni. Some are calling for you to be fired.
Fired? For what?
They're accusing you of anti-Semitism.
Look, I know how much teaching means to you, but you are running out of time. Give them their apology and move on.
Apologize for what?
I'm running out of excuses for you, Karim.
You need to do this.
I can't say these words.
Man, what the fuck just happened in there?
What you need to do right now is shake off this anti-Semite label, or no university is going to come anywhere near you.
If you care for this institution, save your job. Professor Hadawi, this is your final chance.
That is the trailer for a new short film titled Exception that is premiering at the Toronto International Short Film Festival. Production tells the tale of a professor who is wrongly accused of anti-Semitism and takes the viewer throughout the machinery of how anti-Semitism is weaponized in order to stifle any and all criticism of Israel. Khaled Al-Sabawi is the co-screenwriter of the film, and he joins me now. Khaled, welcome to On the Line.
Thank you very much, Samira, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
This is a very powerful film, and I think I was telling you before we started recording that I found it a little bit triggering, to be honest. But I'll get into that with you later. But this is the story of a renowned tenured professor who sort of has to make the choice between his career or the truth, and that's sort of the log line of the film. But I want to read what you wrote on Twitter recently. You write, "Exception. Palestinians are the exception. From international law to liberal values in the West to human rights and free speech. Palestinians are the exception. It is the sinister application of this exception that has enabled the oppression of Palestinians for 75 years and has now paved the way for their genocide." Can you expand on how this film tackles this idea of Palestinians as an exception?
Certainly. Thank you again, Samira. This film takes on an example that exists in a sphere of our society that is supposed to be protected for all. And this is the academic institution or the university institution, where academic freedom and free speech are supposed to be sacred rules that allow everybody to come in and debate and discuss ideas. And we took this as the example to demonstrate the application of this exception that you just mentioned. Because not only is it one of the most important examples to highlight, but it actually represents real stories. It was inspired by real examples of Palestinian professors, or Palestinian American or Palestinian Canadian, or those in the West, that were specifically targeted and singled out and silenced for criticizing Israel, or for simply referring to the, like the mountain of evidence that referred to Israel's human rights violations against the Palestinian people. And what we've learned over time is that this wasn't simply something that just happened suddenly. This was a sinister, planned approach to silence Palestinians, sponsored by the Israeli government. We know that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has a pending arrest warrant for committing the crime of extermination by the ICC, previously had set up a fund and an effort to silence Palestinian American professors that were labeling Israel as an apartheid state. This was part of an effort by the Israeli government to silence Palestinian academics that were, shining any light on the atrocities and human rights violations that Israel is creating or has committed around the world.
You have organizations like Canary Mission who are now sort of going after anybody and everybody. At this point, it's not even just Palestinians who are suffering in this way professionally. You point out at the end of the film, there's a very stark number given. I think it was up until May 15th, 2024, about the number of people who have lost their jobs, they've lost their book deals, they've lost so much just for speaking out, some of them just for even saying ceasefire. And we've been seeing that specifically since October 7th a lot. But this film, the idea for it happened even before October 7th. And how long did it take to sort of bring this production to fruition?
We started writing this film about 2.5 years ago. And it's very important, right? We start off the film by saying this film was written before October 2023, right? To indicate that the application of this exception, or the silencing and the targeting of anyone that's critical of Israel in the West, has been happening for years, right? And you can argue and draw a line connecting the application of this exception to what is taking place now, because these Palestinian academics, or whether it's journalists that were exposing Israeli human rights violations and atrocities, they've been raising the warning flag, saying, everybody, these are war crimes, these are atrocities, this is an apartheid state, as referenced by, we have to wait for Amnesty International to call it an apartheid state, and then Human Rights Watch to call it for an apartheid state, while we Palestinians have known that it's an apartheid state for decades. But now that even the fact that Western human rights organizations were referring to Israel as an apartheid state, the simple fact that Palestinian academics were now bringing this to the light, or discussing it and studying it, was not acceptable in the West. And it's the application of these McCarthyist policies of silencing people is what led us to where we are today.
You spoke about sort of these human rights organizations finally calling Israel what it is, an apartheid state. And I remember that being in 2021. Human Rights Watch came out with their report. Amnesty International followed with their report. But you would be hard-pressed to find any of the Canadian media covering that report, actually. I remember that very specifically. And people were calling out media here for not covering those reports when they came out. Yesterday, I spoke with Canadian doctor Yiping Ji. I'm not sure if you're familiar with his case. This was the Ottawa doctor who was suspended from his residency program at the University of Ottawa's public health center. And he spoke about something that I saw you touch upon in your film, which was about this idea of professionalism and the critique of Israel as being unprofessional. And how not only anti-Semitism being weaponized, but how this behavior of civility or professionalism is weaponized in order to stifle dissent. Can you talk to me a little bit about that, this idea of professionalism?
So just a clarification, do you mean professionalism in the demeanor in which Israel is criticized?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And in the fact that sort of it's unbecoming, I think the president of the university in your film says it's unbecoming of a professor to criticize the state of Israel. When we all know if this was Ukraine, if it was Russia or China, that just wouldn't be the case. But when it comes to Israel, that's the case. Can you talk to me a little bit about how professionalism is weaponized?
Yes, and this is a result of the fact that because anti-Semitism is weaponized, and it can end a career if somebody is labeled or accused as an anti-Semite, Palestinians have to be, the bar or the standard at which is applied for Palestinians in terms of how they approach criticizing Israel is probably the highest bar. We're not even allowed to express emotion. We have to be very, very professional, very, rational, meticulous, right? Yeah. And we have been, by the way, if you look at the academic record, Palestinian scholars from, prior to Edward Said and the rest that came after have been extraordinarily meticulous in documenting Israeli human rights violations and criticizing Israel. Yet in spite of that professionalism that they display, it's simply the fact that they are exposing this issue, that is ruffling so many feathers.
Donors, funders, that's one of the things that you talk about also in the film when it comes to this university. And there's that point in the I think it's a disciplinary hearing that your protagonist is going through where she says you can't call Israel an apartheid state. So she's not even arguing with him that it's not an apartheid state. It's just that you can't call it one. Why do you think, and I asked Diana Boutou, the Palestinian Canadian lawyer, this question a month ago. Why do you think, when all the markers are there, and Khaled, when I was doing research on you, you lived in the West Bank, in the occupied West Bank. You tried to have a business there. I'm not sure if it's still there. But you know all the markers of apartheid. You've lived through it. Why do you think it's so difficult for people to call it what it is?
Yes, and my business is still functioning there. It's been functioning since 2005, and we have witnessed and lived Israel's apartheid system for decades. So there's multiple reasons. Right now, it's a context where you can't even criticize. You can't even say anything about Israel without being targeted in the Western world, right? This is the context that we live in. And sorry, can you repeat the question again?
I was asking why it's so difficult for people when the markers of an apartheid system are all there. Why
right.
do you think it's so difficult for people to call it what it is? What stops them from doing that?
Right. Well, for many reasons. For one, in the Western world, the establishment ruling class, that let's say the sort of oligarchy, the holders of the capital, that control most of the for-profit, media corporations, they identify with Israel. They literally see Israel as an extension of their, colonial project of creating a society like theirs that was established in Canada and the United States. And they don't want to acknowledge the fact that this entity, this country called Israel today, is applying policies that are completely racist to those that are non-Jews that it rules. That questions their relationship to them. That makes them look hypocritical, and that exposes their double standard. And they want to make sure that is definitely something that isn't seen by the public.
There's also this point in the film where you realize that the accusation is enough. Like, the protagonist gets suspended before even the investigation happens, right? And we've seen, particularly since October 7th, I'm speaking, let's be very clear about that. This existed before, but I'm speaking just during this time, these past 11 months. We've seen artists, teachers, journalists, everybody either lose their jobs or get suspended or all of this stuff. I mean, it's a weird time that we're sort of living through. And that's why I said to you that this film, in a lot of ways, I think is going to be triggering for many people who see it, because even the pressure to be quiet is so strong. Right? Even as we sit there and watch in the palms of our hands these horrific scenes of Palestinians being killed. And the first time that I saw you was actually on television. You've lost a lot of family members in Israel's bombardment of Gaza. Dozens of family members. And I don't even know how you're processing that as you sort of try and, publish out this work. How are you doing?
It's over 50 members of my extended family that have been killed. Very early on, when Israel evacuated the north of Gaza, on my mother's side, all the family members went and they took refuge in the east of Gaza in my great-grandpa's house where my mom was born. There was 46 of them, grandparents, parents, children, grandchildren, that all came together to find safety. And a few days later, Israel dropped a missile on the building and killed every single one of them and exterminated them in one instant. It's been hell for us. We have been mourning and grieving for 10 months, nonstop, and we have not looked away once. It has been, tragic in every respect. But with that said, we don't have time to despair. We don't have time to languish in despair. And frankly, action has been the antidote to despair. This is why we're doing what we're doing, to expose, the mountain of issues that led to where we are today. The reason why, for example, like apartheid is a legal definition, for example, right? It's not something that is out to debate. There's a very standard legal definition, and the human rights organizations say Israel met that threshold. But the reason why we can't speak about that is because, we might be legally equal in Canada, according to the Constitution and the Charter, but politically we're not equal. Right? There's multiple levels at which we exist socially as a society, and politically Palestinians are not equal. They are not equal. Palestinian Canadians, let's say, are not equal to other citizens in Canada, which is why you're seeing the fact that they're able to suppress us and prevent us from even speaking out. I was censored by the CBC from speaking out about Israel's war crimes and their killing of my extended family members. There was the journalist that wanted to interview me for CBC was suppressed, and she later wrote about it. And The Breach had a huge expose about how the CBC was, completely suppressing.
You were part of that.
I mentioned in that article. Yeah,
yes.
My name is mentioned in that article because she wanted to interview me, and the CBC wouldn't allow her. Right. So, the subject that we touch on, and the reason why we use the word exception is because these liberal values that were the slogans, the marketing slogans of countries like Canada, that really attracted my parents for to immigrate and to raise us here in Canada, turned out to be just a facade. They really turned out to be this veneer that allowed Canada's ruling class to continue these racist policies in which Canada was born out of. Right? Canada was born out of genocide against the Indigenous people. Canada has a very, very dark history, and it appears that Canada has a dark future, unfortunately, because these liberal values that that Canada was supposed to be known for have been proven to be Canada has proven to be completely hypocritical about these values. We are not being represented. We are being suppressed. We're being caricatured. When you see people protesting against Israel's genocide, these are anti-genocide protesters. They're being dehumanized, by the caricature of Hamas. They're called pro-Hamas protesters. These guys are protesting violations of human rights, right? They are not supporting any single party here. And even in spite of that, there's an effort done by the Zionist lobby in Canada, by legacy media organizations to suppress these voices, to make sure that they're not heard, so Israel can continue its policy of genocide and Canada can continue supporting it. It is shocking, right? Like a country and a society that is supposedly and claiming that they're trying to, do truth and reconciliation with our Indigenous population, right? And find a way forward where we can reconcile the very dark history that we have. This is confronting that head on. Like Trudeau can never say the words truth and reconciliation ever again, based on the policy. He's supporting another country's genocide against the indigenous Palestinians in Gaza. So that shows that they can never reconcile it. So Canada is exposing a significant issue within Canadian identity and within Canadian culture. And if we are to lead with values of human rights, of equality, then we need to be consistent application of those values. We shouldn't be leading based on who's paying the highest amount of money to lobby, because it seems like Canada's for sale today, and the Zionist lobby is significantly influencing where Canada is headed.
I mean, there's a lot of foreign interference going on when it comes to Israel in this country. We know that members of parliament have gone on paid vacations, well, not vacations, but paid tours of Israel, and have come back. And I'm not going to name them because some of them are very litigious, but the film touches upon a lot of the tropes that Israel uses also in trying to show that it's not an apartheid state. Your protagonist talks about, there was at one point where one of the characters says, there are Arabs in the Knesset. There is a robust democracy in Israel, and you just do a great job of turning all of those tropes on their heads. There was a great scene where your protagonist says, there were also black members of Congress who couldn't drink from the same fountain. And so can you talk to me about the way you went about writing this? Like, what was the idea when you started out? Was it you knew that you wanted to touch upon all of these, or did that just sort of organically come about?
So I first want to say that this screenplay came about from a really interesting process where the company that I co-founded, Open Screenplay, which is a Canadian startup, and the M Film Lab, which is a film lab designed to help minority filmmakers emerge, when they leveled the playing field and they held a contest for Muslim screenwriters, this story came out from a young Palestinian American writer named Nader Youssef. And the story was about a Palestinian professor that basically gets silenced for criticizing Israel. And then we were brought in to write the screenplay for it, to bring it up to the production level. So we made sure that we wanted to stay true to Nader's vision of the story, and present it in a way that reflects the reality that we live, the lived experience of Palestinian professors. So we wrote it in a way, to sort of create an example. Here's a professor that is preaching empathy. He is talking he's talking about even viewing your oppressor with empathy in the model of the South Africans, right? In the model of the ANC, and how they looked at their white apartheid South African oppressors as suffering from the disease of racism and thus in need of rehabilitation. So in spite of the fact that you have this guy, preaching nonviolence and empathy, the simple fact that he criticized Israel, was enough to, have the establishment ruling class, the donor community, the rest, put the pressure on him to get rid of him. And what we wanted to show throughout the conversations that he has, especially in the disciplinary committee, was that if you just simply understand the facts, right? If you understand the facts and the reality on the ground, you will dispel all the Israeli myths, all the propaganda points and all the talking points. Like, Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. Well, democracy doesn't simply mean voting. It means equal rights, right? And the Palestinians living under the rule of Israel, whether it's Palestinians living in Israel proper or in Gaza and the West Bank and Jerusalem that are occupied by Israel, they do not have equal rights. Israel does not have a constitution. So we chose some of these talking points that you regularly see in the mainstream media, in which they don't provide a Palestinian voice to dispel them. We just we displayed them in this film, and it shows how the beauty at which and the simplicity at which they could be deconstructed, right? If you refer to facts or you refer to history, then you can understand that all the talking points that they say, that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, that Israel is shares the values of Western countries. But to be honest with you, growing up here, I would always say Israel doesn't share the values of Canada because it's an apartheid state, because it's suppressing and occupying people. But seeing Canada's policy today, to be honest with you, I'm wondering, maybe it is in fact that Canada shares the values of Israel, regrettably and unfortunately, right? Genocide, the suppression of Indigenous people, the suppression of freedom of speech. Canada's headed in a very wrong direction if they're going to continue, saying that Israel, shares their values.
Gaza has really. I was speaking with a friend of mine yesterday, and we were talking about how Gaza has really just peeled back all the layers of this facade of liberal values. And at the same time that the film talks about Palestine being an exception, Israel is also the exception, right? I mean, the international community has shown that it is willing to just dismantle international law in order to allow Israel to keep doing what it's doing, right? This maintaining of genocide, specifically by the US and Germany, but really just allowing it to continue this machinery of violence for, as you say, 75 years. Well, I'm wondering, though, are you seeing things change? Because I'll tell you why I ask you this. As someone who has been studying this for the past 2 decades, writing about it, reporting on it, I have never seen a time like now where people feel emboldened to speak out against what they're seeing. Yes, you're right. The suppression is a lot, but there's also a lot of people who are willing to speak out in a way that they never have before. Are you seeing an outpouring of solidarity that you haven't been seeing before?
Yes, we have. And I think that's simply because people have seen enough slaughtered children and women and people. It's reached a point where if you haven't spoken out to be honest, then you've lost your humanity. And there's something wrong with you. I think it is the sane people have spoken out. The sane people are the ones that have been outraged and have spoken out and have went to social media and have said, you know what, if 40,000 people have been killed, and by the way, the Lancet, one of the most credible peer-reviewed medical journal, reports that it's going to be between 186,000 to 250,000 Palestinians killed, directly or indirectly from Israel's genocide. So if after watching all of
again, I should just to clarify this, that was not covered. Again, this Lancet article was not covered in any Canadian media, mainstream media here. Sorry to interrupt you, but I thought it was important to point that out.
It is very important, right? Again, it speaks to the control and influence of the Zionist lobby, and unfortunately how our establishment ruling class sees themselves in Israel as this colonizing, project. It's really a problem. It's really a problem for the, So we have seen people come out, in support, right? Because those are the sane people. And at this point, if you haven't spoken out about this, then you're complicit, right? Your silence is complicit. And what you don't realize is that, what goes around comes around. I mean, we live in a world where if the crime that's happening against the Palestinians right now in Gaza is not simply a crime against the Palestinians, it is a crime against humanity. It is a crime against all of us. So if you are not taking a stance against this, then what do you stand for? You have some serious reflecting to do. You're living in a bubble, and that bubble is going to burst, and it's going to, and when it bursts, it's going to bring all that negativity, home. So it is our responsibility to shed light on this, not simply for somebody who grew up as Palestinian, but as a human being. It's our responsibility to shed light on the atrocities that were taking place before in the past and now. We when we created this film, there's a specific reason why we said, this was written before October 2023, because we wanted to specify that, this could have been prevented, right? Like, people were raising this flag, people were shining a light on this, but they were being silenced and being suppressed. So, the complicity of institutions, Canadian institutions, for example, goes far back, not just now.
Khalid, what do you want an audience to take away most from this film after watching it?
I want them to realize and see the enormous amounts of injustice that have been subjected to the Palestinian people historically and currently. I want them to see the problem of the influence of special interests, primarily the Zionist lobby in Canada and the United States and in Western countries. I want them to reflect on, the question of how democratic their societies are, if they can be influenced by money. Because if money can influence the politicians and can influence how those politicians react, then they don't represent their constituents. They don't represent people like me and you, they represent the interests of the money. And if that's the question, then is Canada for sale? And at what price? What's Canada's price? And I think Canadians will be repulsed by that idea. I mean, we're supposed to, and I want them to reflect on these values that we preach, right? That we proclaim to the world, right? These virtuous slogans that we come up with: Canada being inclusive, diverse, and equality. Are those just platitudes? Are those just virtue signaling to hide a dark past and even a dark present that exists in Canadian society? Because Canada's future depends on how we behave in the present now. And I hope that people see that now is the time to act. Now is the time. And they can't shut us all up, right? Professor Hadawi in our film is an example, is a courageous voice. And if we all join together and we all speak out, then they can't suppress us all.
What do you say to people who might say to you, well, if it wasn't for Hamas doing this on October 7th, Gaza wouldn't be where it is today? What do you say to those people?
Yeah, this is just, again, it's already been dispelled online, right? It started on October 7th. This is just nonsense at this stage, right? Israel has been, violating Palestinian human rights since its inception, since even before it was incepted. The Zionist militias and forces that created the State of Israel created terrorist organizations, and then those rulers of the leaders of those terrorist organizations became the prime ministers of Israel and completely subjected Palestinians to human rights violations that go for decades. So this did not start on October 7th, right? The human rights record speaks to this in minute detail.
For listeners who don't know, Khalid is referring to the Ergun, the Haganah, the Stern Gang. These are Jewish militia terrorist groups that were blowing up railways, schools, hotels, way before the establishment of the State of Israel. They were doing this in Palestine. Sorry, go ahead.
Right. And I mean, that's to go back in time. And even just in the recent historical record, just read the human rights reports, right? These are Western human rights organizations that have high credibility in Western society, like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. Even read the Israeli human rights organizations, such as B'Tselem. You'll see that Israel has been suppressing Palestinian people, occupying them militarily, denying them their basic, inalienable, and fundamental human rights for decades. I mean, look, just in the year 2023, there was about 250 Palestinians that were killed in the West Bank by the Israeli military, right? Did anybody say anything about that in the Canadian media? Did anybody criticize Israel? No. But when one of the Palestinian armed resistance groups, retaliated, and they did, although they did commit atrocities during those, that retaliation, it's not simply that it started on October 7th. This has just been pure Israeli propaganda. I mean, look, the Israeli government, within the first month of after October, poured about $2.5 million in running advertising campaigns on social media just to drudge up support for what they knew was going to be a genocidal campaign against Palestinians.
We all saw that disgusting, I use the word disgusting, and I don't use it lightly, YouTube ad in the first month of this bombardment on Gaza. It was a YouTube ad that was promulgating the lie of 40 beheaded babies. And I'm going to play that during this interview. But Khalid, I just want to finish with one last question for you. I'm eager. I know that this is going to be the premiere in Toronto, but I'm just wondering what responses you've had up to this point to the film.
So it's been very early on in the festival circuit, as they say when a film gets released. So we've just a month into it, I guess, and we've been selected in 4 festivals. On this Saturday, it will be the Canadian premiere, which will be at the Toronto Shorts International Film Festival, which is August 24th, and it will be at 5 p.m. It premiered in the U.S. at the San Antonio Film Festival about a month ago, and the response has been outstanding. The festival coordinators have reached out to us and just expressed gratitude and thanks for this film, for the timeliness of the subject, and for the importance of this subject. So we're very grateful. We know that there was a lot of hard work that went into it, and we're very proud of the result. And we can't wait to get it out into more festivals and even eventually release it online for people to see. I mean, just from simply the trailer getting put online, the response has been outstanding. Thousands of people have messaged us and expressed their desire to watch the film and to say it's about time that something like this has come out, because you don't hear Palestinian voices. There's a problem of representation in the mainstream media and in the storytelling medium of film and television, right? This has been documented. Women screenwriters are underrepresented. Minority screenwriters are represented by ratios, of 5 to 1 and 7 to 1. So this is what happens when you just allow Palestinian voices to emerge, or you allow authentic voices to emerge. They tell you stories that you don't usually hear about. And, there's an indigenous proverb that says, those who tell the stories rule the world. So it's very important for us to level the playing field, because once you do, you will, the world that you think exists out there will be turned almost over its head when you hear the lived experiences of different people around the world.
Khalid, thank you so much. For listeners, please go out and see Exception. I think on the Open Screenplay website, I think you also allow people to hold their own screenings of this film. Is that correct?
No, not yet. You can request.
Okay, you can
submit
request
a
it.
request. Yeah.
Okay.
But right now it's going through the festival circuit, and once that's finished, we'll be allowing screenings.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Samira, for this conversation. I appreciate it very much.